Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Long Live Rock and Roll podcast. In 1966, Eric Clapton, Jack Bruce and Ginger Baker left their previous projects to form Cream, rock's first supergroup and a defining force in Britain's electric blues rock movement. Their debut album, Fresh Cream, was the starting point for this power trio, revolutionising British blues by elevating the electric guitar's role, blending hard rock, psychedelia and jazz, and setting a high standard for blues-inspired musicians seeking their own unique sound. Joining me to discuss this album is my co-host, Mr. Felipe Amarim. How you doing, bro?
Doing great, man. And you?
Good. Yeah, good. Thank you. Another good week.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the same old.
Good week.
Life ticks on. Yeah, one of those weeks.
Drumming and listening to music and all that stuff.
Perfect life. Excellent. Well, let's jump straight in. As usual, guys, you're going to get some... Actually, as usual, we'll do the T's and C's first. If you're listening on Apple, Amazon or Spotify, do us a favour, scroll down, give us 5 stars, write a little comment about the show, because it's going to help us be seen by more people on these podcasting platforms. And if you have nice words to say about us and give us good reviews, then we're going to go higher up the chart and be seen by more people. If you're watching and or listening on YouTube, make sure you hit like and subscribe so you stay up to date with all of our new content. So some album details. So the album is called Fresh Cream by the band Cream, released on the 9th of December 1966, recorded between August and November of the same year at the Mayfair Recording Studios in London. The genres mainly associated with it would be blues rock or psychedelic rock. We can discuss that a bit further. The label it came out on was Reaction, and it was produced by Robert Stigwood. So, where do we start? Cream.
Well, where do we start? From the musicians, maybe.
Let's do that. Do you know what? Actually, let me just do a quick British blues explosion background.
Yeah.
So for anyone who's obviously been with us for a while, episode 17 we did on Cream, and we did it as like a band episode, just an overview of their career, what albums hit which spot and why. But now, obviously, we're focusing much more on the first album. So the British blues explosion, there was a blues revival in Britain during the 1960s because we had a popularisation of American blues artists like John Mayall, Alexis Corner, even the Rolling Stones, you know, obviously putting some of that American bluesisms into their music and taking that influence. Because in the 50s, we saw American blues musicians come over to the UK. Do you want to talk a bit about that? Because remember we studied it in uni.
Yeah, exactly. Also, yeah. So there was this movement, this idea of bringing the early blues songwriters, singers, guitar players to the UK to perform, isn't it?
Yep.
And that, I think that was what started the blues movement in the UK. Was that it?
Yeah.
Is that what it is? Do you think that was exactly when people started to play blues in the UK
I think,
as a thing?
Yeah, I think that's certainly when they were starting to hear more obviously. Because, you know, it's not like nowadays where like you just send someone on WhatsApp, hey, check out this track that was released in Indonesia.
You needed the live experience back in the day.
Exactly,
people were not performing in town, you wouldn't know about them.
No, exactly. And, you know, it's not like you would send over to America your vinyl and be like, hey, mate, check out track 3. You know, it's like, it was much more of a, like you said, a live experience, just seeing what bands were like and what they were sounding like. And because of this, you know, this movement provided a massive platform, especially for someone like Eric Clapton, because you have to remember, we'll talk about them in a second, but Clapton came from almost a purely blues background.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, well, let's talk about Clapton.
Clapton actually saw Buddy Guy live, and he said they changed his life. You know,
wow, really?
He changed his approach to music. And so that was one of the experiences that happened with these blues musicians playing in the UK.
Yeah. Well, Clapton was a guitarist for the Yardbirds until about 1965, where he left because he felt they were becoming a bit too commercial. He wanted something a bit more niche, a bit more obscure. He didn't want to just dabble in, you know, pop music or whatever it was. And so then from then, he joined John Mayall's Blues Breakers. Now, there is an album called Blues Breakers with Eric Clapton, and it's actually on our list to do over the next couple of months, so we will get to that one because it's a very important album. It's basically the album where British rock bands, I'm generalizing here, but a British rock band took the blues that we've just been talking about from the 50s and 60s and electrified it and basically showed a new way of how to characterize blues in Britain.
Basically,
This,
played it louder.
yeah, louder and with a much harsher guitar tone.
Yeah.
His guitar playing on this album earned him the nickname God
Yes,
in
he was
guitar
considered the
circles.
god of guitar at the
Yeah,
time.
which
Yeah,
is a rather
that was
appropriate title, yeah, isn't it?
yeah.
And quite a, you'd be very proud to have that. Now on to Jack Bruce. Jack Bruce was a classically trained musician, but he had a very strong background in jazz, and I love this because you can hear it throughout his career. These little jazz playings. He was part of a jazz blues fusion group called the Graham Bond Organization, which I believe Ginger Baker was also a part
Yes,
of.
he was part of yeah.
He was as well,
And
was he?
they didn't get along that well, did they?
No, they didn't.
They were
No,
not good friends.
no. Well, why don't you talk about Ginger Baker? Tell us a bit about his background.
So Ginger Baker was clearly into jazz. You can hear in his drumming, and he was into the all the classic like jazz drummers. And I'm not quite sure if he wanted to be like a traditional rock drummer. I don't think he ever wanted to play rock music, as it's supposed to be played or as people were playing at the time.
Mm.
His approach has a lot of percussion elements to it. So he wouldn't play like percussion instruments, like just bring bongos and congas to the studio, but he would hit the drums as if he's playing that sort of stuff. And I'm sure. I read a lot about him as well. He was into African music as well. So the idea of using the toms and the low drums as well as part of the groove instead of, because normally a drum beat is bass drum, snare drum, and hi-hat. So it's one cymbal and the lowest and the highest drum in the kit. That's what you do for the drum beat. And he was just using the whole kit to express himself and actually to build the grooves. And the other thing which is very jazzy about his approach is he doesn't repeat himself. Very rarely he plays two consecutive bars of the same thing. When you think about pop music and you think about early rock music and even blues, the drummer is normally told to stick to one beat. So you play the same groove throughout the whole song,
Keep
with
the time.
occasional phrase or fill at the end of 12 bars or something like that to like signpost the next section of the song, but you stick to the beat. And he wasn't like that. He refused to be like that. So in jazz music, especially modern jazz, I would say it's very common. It's not a surprise that a drummer wouldn't play the same beat all the time. It's a lot of improvisation. But in rock music, I don't think anyone has done to that extent up to that point in time.
You mean, bringing the jazz? I completely agree.
Playing drums like that, never sticking to one beat, and always doing something different every bar. I think you have John Bonham, Ginger Baker, and Keith Moon as the three drummers for me who actually changed the role of a drummer in a rock band.
Excellent. Well, I want to talk about John Bonham a bit later. I think you know where I'm going to talk to you about. So there are the three musicians who formed Cream. They were all, so what we're trying to get at with this little intro is that all three of these musicians were as good as, I don't know, is virtuoso too much of a word? They were pretty damn good. No. Not too much of a word. That's a good word. Yeah,
that's a great word. Actually, there's a Rolling Stone magazine. I want to get the exact quote. There's an article about them, which they basically say.
Hold on, wait. What year was the article?
Oh, I think that's recent.
Okay,
it's not a late one.
Yeah.
Crucially, they were the first rock band to feature a virtuoso player on every instrument. So I think that I agree with that statement, because
if Rolling Stone say it, then I'm happy for us to agree with it.
Well, yeah.
So you have these.
I think all the rock critics were talking about the musicians rather than the band, isn't it?
Yeah.
Anyway,
And so because of this, in mid-1966, Ginger Baker decided that he wanted to form a new band. Now, he approached Clapton. Obviously, as we said, all of these musicians were highly regarded at the time, but Clapton had a little, let's say a term and condition. He was basically like, I want to join this band, but only if we get Jack Bruce in. Now, Jack Bruce had already had conflicts with Ginger Baker, hadn't he, in the lead up to forming Cream?
Yeah, they were not good friends. I don't know if it was like musical differences or they just didn't like each other. And I think Ginger Baker didn't want Jack Bruce in the band, but Clapton said, I want him as a bassist and I won't do it without him. So that was it.
I think this is fascinating. John, let me just finish. My
Yeah.
last note is the band's name Cream came from the idea that they were the cream of the crop. They were the three best musicians out there, the cream of the crop, so to speak, and we're going to make a band based on that. Wicked. So that's the background and the context of the band done. Next, we'll move on and talk a bit about the music. But I just want to say first how crazy it is to execute music properly, as you and I know, and as we know from our heroes and the bands we love. There has to be some form of understanding, companionship, camaraderie to execute an album and the music to a fantastic extent. But however, throughout history, we've seen moments like Rumours by Fleetwood Mac, where people were not getting on. And every now and then you have these moments of stardust where people did not like each other, band members did not get on, yet somehow something fantastic comes out from it. Rumours was a one-off, wasn't it? But for a band like Cream to have done three of arguably the most important albums in rock, all whilst Ginger and Jack were hating each other. I just think that's...
And they did
you've got to commend them.
3 years, right?
You've got to commend them. Because I look at them and I think, well, I'm sorry that was probably the three most miserable years of your lives, but thank you for what you gave us from it, you know.
Yeah. But I recommend a documentary. I think it's called Beware of Mr. Baker.
So you recommended that when we did the Cream episode, so I'll put that again in the show notes so that we have a look to that
You're going to see what kind of character Ginger Baker was.
Yeah.
Not the easiest person to deal with, I guess.
No, I'm sure. But anyway, let's talk about the music. So I just want to talk about where the fantastic blending of genres we have here. And we often say this about albums that were pioneering, that were innovative, how they mix things. But what I love here, especially with this album, is how every song, near enough, is rooted in the blues. Yeah. But they just take a certain little aspect and they roll with that and it pushes it towards this. Or they make this a little bit more psychedelic and it pushes it towards psychedelia. They'll use some heavy guitar tone and some heavy drumming and that'll push it towards hard rock. And I just love how they have this unique sound, but each song has a little different aspect added in that takes it almost entirely into a new genre.
Yeah, I think half of the album is traditional blues, is someone else's music.
Yeah,
but they don't play anything in a traditional way, and I think that was the point. You know,
great point. Yeah. So I just want to talk a little bit about what was going on at the time musically and how, from my interpretation, Cream looked at and adapted this. So let's look at pop music. Okay, the Beatles were pushing the boundaries in terms of pop music. They were using technological advancements. Their songwriting was, really sort of flourishing, especially with all four members writing. Bigger emphasis on the album, a cohesive collection of songs, as opposed to just a bunch of singles. And the songs I hear on Fresh Cream, I hear I Feel Free, Dreaming, and For Until Late. These really exude a kind of pop sensibility to me.
Yeah.
They're easy to listen to, nice chords, accessible melodies. Dreaming, I think, is lovely. One of my favourite songs on the album.
There's a falsetto vocal in that song. It's so beautiful. Like,
it is. It's lovely. The chords are just simple. It sounds like a doo-wop song from the 50s, For Until...
Psychedelic, though, isn't it?
A little, yeah, exactly. Yeah. For Until Late reminds me of When I'm 64 by the Beatles. So similar. Like, just a really nice pop sensibility to it. And in terms of the blues sound, which we've already touched on, I'm sure you'll touch on the blues a lot later because you are the blues man. In the UK at the time, you had the Rolling Stones, which I said right at the top of the show, pioneering the American blues sound. And you've got the obvious songs here, Spoonful, Rolling and Tumbling, just a very obvious blues-rooted sound. Now, in terms of hard rock, at this time you had the Kinks, who essentially... arguably the first ever heavy metal riff came from, I always bloody forget it. I want to say All Day and All the Night, but it's not. What one did Van Halen cover?
The Van Halen song.
Yeah, of the Kinks.
Oh, you really got me, isn't
Bro, I looked for that song only last week when we did the Jimi Hendrix
it?
album.
You keep
Do you
forgetting the
remember?
title.
I keep forgetting that Kinks song, and
It's
the
not
Kinks are
that
one.
famous, is it?
But they're one of my favourite bands. They're one of
No,
my
it's a
favourite
classic
bands.
song.
I should be ashamed. Yeah, You Really Got Me was arguably the first ever heavy metal riff because it
Yeah,
just had that pure distortion.
yeah,
So you had the Kinks and the Who embracing heavier sounds, laying the foundations for hard rock and even heavy metal. I listen to this album and I hear in songs NSU, Sweet
yeah.
Wine, and Cat Squirrel, I hear the early dawn of hard rock. That
Interesting.
dirty, heavy
Yeah,
guitar sound that Zeppelin would come on and do, that Deep Purple would go and do, that would then transform into heavy metal. I
yeah,
hear it in those songs. And finally, in terms of the psychedelic elements, psychedelia, as we talked about with Hendrix and Purple Haze, it was gaining traction in London. The hippie counterculture that was sort of swarming around, the younger generations of the 60s and 70s. You had Pink Floyd doing their stuff as well, just the year after this. And I listened to Sleepy Time, I'm So Glad, I Feel Free, and Dreaming, and I hear the psychedelic elements there, and I hear what you heard Hendrix do, or what Hendrix did the year after, and what Pink Floyd were doing. You can hear the direction it's moved in. So I just wanted to sort of touch on those four little genres, if you like, and just identify what I hear from Fresh Cream in them. And it's just brilliant, as I said at the start, how they've managed to incorporate these and take tiny little elements. But don't get me wrong, bro, there are overlaps here. What did I say? I Feel Free, I've got in pop and psychedelic.
yeah,
It doesn't have to be one or the other, but I just
yeah.
hear little elements in it. What do you think about what I've said about pop, blues,
No,
hard rock, and
I think
psychedelic?
that because some of the songs are even short, really. They have some long, like there's some like really long solos and long songs, but they have some 2.5 minute tracks, with the emphasis on the vocals. That's pop music, that's the formula of pop music. It's more about the vocals than anything else. I think everyone was expecting them to be a band of soloists as the main thing, which to a certain extent they were. But I think there's um, a lot of melody, a lot of like vocal harmonies. There's this. I think the intention was also to write good material. Although there's an interesting quote from Jack Bruce, which I found really interesting. Is that the songs are unimportant; they are jumping off points for improvisation. So
Hmm,
his take on it, it's really weird that he said that in a certain way.
that is weird,
That,
yeah,
yeah, because
because
he just wanted to, basically, I think he just wanted to improvise. He came from like a formal music background, but he didn't like it. He said
yeah,
the thing with music education is people telling you how to do things in a certain way, and they do not allow the individual to experiment and to express themselves. So he said he didn't feel like an individual and was having music lessons, and he wrote like a strings quartet. And the teacher was like, "Oh, this is wrong. This doesn't work. You'll never be a writer. That's not for you. You should play the cello and just be an instrumentalist and play someone else's stuff." That's what is
wow,
being told by a music teacher. And said, you know, I don't care. I'm going to do my own thing. So I think in his mind, he was just writing whatever, like any riffs or any basic idea. He also said like the idea was to have the start and the end of a song and do whatever in the middle, just improvise the whole middle section of it, which I think it's the case when they play in the blues. I think I don't know if you can tell this difference when they playing someone else's material. I think it's basically what he said. The song is not that important. It's just a canvas for them to create their own stuff,
yeah.
but their own stuff is very melodic. I think Jack Bruce wasn't fair to himself as a songwriter, and everyone talks a lot about Clapton and Ginger Baker, but Jack Bruce was the lead singer. Clapton only sings in one song, if I'm not wrong, in the whole album,
Yeah, true.
and he was the main songwriter in the band. Phenomenal musician. I think so underrated, really. Sometimes we talk about some of the greatest songwriters and singers in rock history. We don't remember him sometimes.
I've got them. Yeah, so
Yeah,
Jack Bruce basically wrote every song.
yeah.
Sweet
All the
Wine,
original stuff.
Sweet
Yeah.
Wine was written by Ginger Baker and Jack Bruce's wife, but all the
Mm.
original stuff, except
No, I think it
Toad
was
as
Jack
well.
Bruce, wasn't it? Wasn't it Sweet Wine
I've got
by?
Sweet Wine being Ginger Baker and Jack Bruce's
Mm.
wife, Janet
All right,
Godfrey.
cool,
Have you got something different?
No. I thought it was Jack Bruce as well.
Okay, yeah, but this is a pattern throughout, and as the albums go on, you have a little bit more influence from Clapton and writing from
Yeah.
Clapton and Ginger Baker. But for a debut album, man, and it's really interesting you say that because in a way I disagree. What I hear when what Jack Bruce has said, I hear it in those blues songs,
Yeah.
but the songs still feel organized. They feel cohesive and well written. They don't feel improvisational.
No.
And what I mean by that is, I don't know. Let's compare it to something like,
Well, you have like
go
vocal
on.
harmonies, for instance, that has to be planned, you know.
Yeah,
And you
yeah,
have an intro with just vocals, and then there's a stop, then there's a bass riff. It is a composition, right? But
yeah,
I think what the way I see it, it's like it's clear for me that their material was something they really spend a lot of time arranging. And the blues stuff, they say we're just going to do it. We're just going to improvise on top of this.
in that sense, that's
I
fine
think
then,
I
and
can
I
see
agree. Yeah,
those two sides in the album in a certain way.
yeah.
I don't
No,
know.
you're absolutely right with that. Yeah. Now, something that was extremely important to about this band and especially this album was a new kind of band that was pioneered by Cream, the Power Trio.
Yeah.
Tell us a bit about the Power Trio.
Well, poetry is like you can think of Rush, you can think of the Police, you can think of
Hendrix.
Hendrix Experience. You know, there's so many like poetries, but I think Cream was the band that showed to the world that this could be done, and it could be done without any additional musicians. It's a really interesting point about, well, I know we're going to talk about the production, but there's no additional musicians in the album. And there's not too much overdub. They try to play most of it live due to budget restrictions as well. But because I think they said we can do. So if you're calling yourself the Cream, right? If they calling themselves the best band in town, they're not being really humble about this. It's like we're the best band in town. So you can't use too much, of extra people or resources that they're going to kind of disguise your sound. You need to deliver the sound as a three-piece band, and I think they wanted to prove the point.
It's almost the opposite of Steely Dan. Steely Dan never said we were the best, but they just wanted to make their music as good as they could, so they brought in shitload of musicians. Whereas Cream, that's a great point you make, where they must have been like, we've identified ourselves as the cream of the crop, so we're going to do everything on this album, and I think that's a fair point. So yeah, the Power Trio, I mean, what a way. I mean, you and me have played in a Power Trio with Jack, and it was brilliant. I love it. I think it's such a great format because never have I felt so connected to the music when I play in a Power Trio, because I think sometimes if you add a keyboard player, it can almost
there's a clash, isn't it?
Yeah, when you play with a Power Trio, you're going for that raw energy, and it suits rock music a lot. You know, as we've seen, Nirvana, Hendrix, Rush, Cream. When you add a keyboard, it almost, I'm going to use the word overproduced, because a keyboard can have a plethora of sounds on it that can give you any sound you want. If you want an organ, you've got it. If you want a piano, you've got it. If you want some synth, you've got it. And for that reason, because the keyboard is such an advanced instrument, I think it detracts from it being a raw rock band. In the same way, adding a rhythm guitarist means you're taking away one of the jobs of the bass. And you're also taking away one of the jobs of the guitar. And we commented last week on how, or 2 weeks ago, how seamlessly Hendrix was able to switch between rhythm and lead guitar, and that really showed his expertise in the instrument. So when I hear a Power Trio, and when we played in a Power Trio, I made sure that my job as the bass player was to give the guitar all the support it needed. And if that meant playing a chord on the bass, if that meant playing a note that wasn't the root note because I wanted to harmonize what the guitar was doing in the root, then I'd do that. I love the Power Trio format. It's just amazing.
I mean, if you play with a like 10-piece band with like percussion, 2 keyboards, and backing vocalists and all that stuff, less is more, because there's a lot of layers. There's a lot of people doing something, one detail. So sometimes, if there's 2 guitar players in the band, they don't have to play all the time. So you want one of the guitar players should not play for a couple of bars and just play a short phrase on top of the rhythm. But when you have only 3 musicians, you need to fill all the gaps, and there's a danger of doing too much of that and overplaying, which I think Cream does a little bit of overplay, but intentional overplay. Jack Bruce's bass lines they're not simple, they're really busy, but they're very melodic. I think his classical music background might have helped with that. I don't know, because I find as a drummer, I find quite annoying when a bassist doesn't stick to the bass line and just plays a million different things, because it's a moving target. You can't groove with the guy. But
great point.
There's only I think there's only a couple of bassists that I can think of that actually do that really well. Jack Bruce, John Entwistle, and Chris Squire are the first names that come to my mind. Maybe John Paul Jones, if you consider him as a guy who plays a lot of notes, but he doesn't do that all the time.
Good point. Yeah, and all of them are right. And Jack Bruce's playing was incredibly melodic and intricate. I'd go as far as saying sometimes it was almost like the bass was a second lead instrument at some time, especially if Clapton was doing anything, and I'm not talking just about this album.
Lead bass.
yeah. But if Clapton was doing anything rhythmic, that kind of gives Jack Bruce. But that's the position of the bass in a power trio.
Yeah.
If the guitar has to do something rhythmic, like hold a chord or do a rhythm just with chords, the bass then has the free. I'm not actually. I don't want to use that phrase. I was going to say the bass has the freedom. I don't think it's about freedom. I don't think it's about Jack Bruce going, okay, my time to shine. I think it's Jack Bruce going, okay, the guitar is holding down the rhythm here. What's the point of having a guitar, a bass, and a drummer all doing rhythmic? I'm going to go and take the lead now. And whether it's in the form of a high-end bass melody or a little bass line that just counteracts whatever the guitar's doing, I think that's Jack Bruce's responsibility to do that. And I appreciate, from a drummer, how it might get annoying sometimes, but I think 9 times out of 10, he nails it.
That's what I'm saying. Like, there's a handful of bassists that can actually do that properly, and I think he got it right throughout the whole album. I think he is my favorite of the 3 of them in this album specifically. I think he is the guy who holds it together, and of course he wrote the songs as well.
Yeah. So just to finish off on the music, let's talk a bit about each member. So Clapton, we know obviously what he did from the blues in the years before, but I think what's really impressive in this album is hear him go from his strict traditional blues to playing with hard rock riffs, experimental sounds, psychedelia. I thought it was quite fresh to hear that. Fresh cream.
Yeah, fresh cream. Well, the thing is, we normally call rock music when you mixing a lot of stuff, right? And when you mix anything that became before rock, you just call it rock.
Exactly.
So that would be Clapton's first rock album, right? Because he was changing the way the blues was played, but he was still playing blues, and he was still kind of stuck in that formula and the structure of the blues. Although his guitar playing was completely different than everyone else at the time. His guitar tone was unique, but he was still playing blues music. And this album, he was just doing something else. And we know him as a singer and songwriter as well, but he's not singing much in that band. So basically, he had all that time to focus on the guitar playing. So that was before he became an actual band leader or solo artist. So he's no longer serving the blues. How can I put it? The blues community or the blues movement. When he was playing with the Blues Breakers, like, there's a lot of restriction there. You're not really an active member of the band. You're just playing guitar. He was, getting paid to go there and be the best guitar player he could be. But I don't think he was in charge of any creative decisions.
That's a great point.
He could do a lot more.
That's a great point, because you know more than anyone about the blues community, and I've got so much respect. I love the blues community, especially in London. Where you play at the blues bar however many times a week, and I've played there a few times with you. The blues community there is fantastic. I don't think I've ever seen such a passionate group of people who just love one aspect of music. I'm not saying everyone there only likes blues, but when they all come together at the blues bar, it's just, let's talk blues. However, there is a slight element, and I'm going to let you take this because you're part of the community, so if we get any shit for this, you can have it. However, I would just say there is a slight gatekeeping aspect, where personally, from my experience, I've seen and heard people say, you can't do that. That's not like traditional blues. A traditional blues player wouldn't have used a fuzz pedal or something like that. And so I'm going to ask you, do you agree? But then my point after was that it's great to see Eric Clapton, if you do agree with my point, break out of that little community to go and start something completely new.
Honestly, I joke that I work for the blues police, right? The blues police is everywhere. So if I'm wearing trainers and someone spots me with trainers, that's it. That's the end of my career in the blues scene. Got to wear shoes, proper shoes. And but there's. I think I actually kind of admire the fact that some people want to keep the tradition alive, doing things in a certain way. That's also important.
Well, it's arguably the most important foundation of Western music.
Oh, so yeah, if we lose the blues, like if we can't go to a place and see traditional blues played as close as possible to its original form, then we're killing a really important tradition.
Yeah, good point.
However, it's always important to bring innovations to music. But if you go into a live music venue and if you want to see a certain genre played as close as possible to the original, that's great. But also, if you're writing music like Cream was doing, if you want to release an album and if you want to contribute to music as a whole, not to one genre, then you have to set yourself free and do whatever comes to your mind, which I think it's unfortunately missing in most, not all of it, but most of modern music. You don't see too many people breaking away from formulas. Everyone is afraid of trying stuff. Oh, it's not going to sell. And there's I think it was the same interview I watched with Jack Bruce. He says, like, we didn't try to do, we need to do the song under 2.5 minutes, and it needs to have a appealing vocal for an 11-year-old girl from Seattle. So no, it's like we don't care about who's going to listen to it. Like, we're doing what we want to do. Yeah. We said this many times in the show. I think that very often the best kind of music comes out of that attitude.
Mm-hmm. For sure. Okay, so you touched on Bruce and Clapton. Do you want to tell us a bit about Ginger Baker's drumming on this album? I think you already touched a bit on the use of drums, but his playing style. One thing that stood out to me is how jazzy it was. It's like Bill Ward in Black Sabbath, isn't it? You really brought the jazz chops from jazz into this new psychedelic hard rock kind of thing. Yeah,
when you listen to the album, I would say, like, comparing him to Keith Moon and John Bonham, I think he doesn't sound as loud as them. He's more about the phrasing, and there's a certain finesse for someone who's playing heavy rock. It's heavy, but there's more nuances. There's more like quiet notes and loud notes. So he would alternate between loud and quiet in the same phrase. So he goes up and down, goes in waves. It's not. So that is certainly from jazz. Also, the freedom of not sticking to the groove, as I said, and the spaces between the phrases as well. So it's not, by all means, he's never predictable. That's the thing about Ginger Baker. And sure. And another element that I didn't mention is the use of cymbals. I can hear like the ride cymbal sometimes louder than the bass and the snare in some grooves, which is what jazz drummers do. In rock music, the snare is much louder than the cymbal when you're playing a groove, and he keeps the cymbal as the main element for some of the grooves. So it's almost like he's almost not heavy enough for a rock band, and it's just perfect for that sound.
But that's what makes this album the wonderful blend of genres that it is, isn't it? You've got Clapton on this really distorted, heavy sounding guitar, but Ginger Baker sort of resting back, isn't it?
And the last thing I would say about him, if you listen to the last song on the album, that's his drum solo, right? So there's just a little riff, which is the formula that Led Zeppelin copied for Moby Dick. So
pause a second, just to tell the listeners that every song we've mentioned is in a Spotify playlist that you're going to find in the show notes. Click the link and you're going to find every song on this album. For this episode, I've also included the original song for all the covers they've done on the album. So you've got the full album, the originals of the covers they've done, and then any other song that we've mentioned, like You Really Got Me, Moby Dick, will be there as well, so you can listen along. Whenever we mention a song, you can have a little listen and see what we're talking about. Felipe, please carry on.
Yeah, so if you listen to his solo in the album, it's interesting because he doesn't give it all on the first few bars. He starts with a rhythm and he builds up. So
Yeah,
he's playing a rhythm. He gets you into the rhythm, and he's playing on the toms, as I said, the lower drums, the bigger drums, and it is playing on like a melody. So it sounds like is a percussive approach to drums, and then
for
at
sure.
the end he plays extremely fast. At the end is when he's like, "Okay, I'm going to show what I can do." And I like that sort of soloing because it's not there's a story, he tells a
Yeah.
story with the solo. It's not, so I think a lot of people were expecting them to be even more how can I put it, to express their ability to play the instruments even more, to be more virtuosos than they actually are in the album. I
Mm.
think like the first single was a surprise because the people who liked them before they formed the band were expecting them to uh, uh, um, to do something musically impressive. And I think Ginger Baker is kind of on the edge of overplaying all the time, but there's some really tasty grooves that don't sound too loud and don't overpower the rest of the band.
I think I'd excuse me. I'd attribute what you just said to the whole band. I
Yeah,
think they're all on the edge of overplaying, and I can't think of a song where I'd say, yeah, they've overplayed there. It's 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 almost perfect. I don't want to say the thing for me is I wish I liked Cream more than I do, and but that's not an insult. Like I think they're fantastic, but excuse me, I've got something in my throat. Um, I think the quality of their music, the quality of their musicianship, what they've done for rock music, they deserve to be in my top 10 bands, but
yeah,
they just haven't quite, and it's a personal thing. There's nothing they've done wrong. Certain songs are just unbelievable. I definitely want to do their other two albums in later episodes, but I think when I
yeah,
think of White Room, Sunshine of Your Love, Badge,
yeah,
Politician, they're all just incredible. And I love the journey that this album has taken us on, the starting blocks to establish this psychedelic hard rock blues rooted music that they then went and expanded.
yeah.
But yeah, I mean I think that's all to say really about the music. The only other thing I wanted to mention is how important this was at this time, bringing blues to a younger audience.
Interesting. Yeah,
Because think
I
about it,
don't
you've
know.
got, the Beatles doing their pop thing, all the bands I mentioned, the Who and the Kinks sort of pushing hard rock a little more. You've got these new audiences that were rebelling against the system and not wanting to listen to what their parents were listening to. Suddenly you got Cream coming in with like a 6.5 minute song with loads of blues guitar solos.
Yeah,
I just thought it was it's not like one of the most important points of this album, but just acknowledging that a younger audience were introduced to blues through this.
blues and jazz maybe.
Great point. Yeah, great point. Do you want to talk a bit about the production?
Well, what I said before is the fact that they don't have additional musicians and they did actually everything in 4-track machines. So
Yep.
it's all recorded with 4 tracks, which is, you know, it does limit your capacity to overdub, or
Hmm.
makes it a lot harder to do actually.
So you've got to
Uh,
rely on the performance.
yeah, yeah, exactly. So it's not, so the production is not about making them sound bigger than they are. That's one thing with production in general. You can get like a kind of a weak guitar sound and make it sound bigger. I think
Mm,
they capture a lot of the sound of the room, and I think a lot of the performance. Again, it was a budget thing. I think they didn't have too much money to record this specific album,
yeah.
and probably they had to do it in limited time.
Mm,
So I think, yeah, so when you record like that, when you don't have time and money to do loads of overdubs, you only do the ones that are really meaningful to the song. So you
yeah.
keep that feel of a power trio, um, and uh, and then you just add the small elements that are going to make it sound better. So I like the harmonicas.
Yeah.
I like the way the backing vocals are mixed as well. So there's a lot of, for me, there's a lot of room sound, a lot of reverb, in natural reverb in the record. I might be wrong. It might be artificial
No, I
reverb.
think you're right, and I think there's a perfect balance, as what you've said. They've captured that live energy and live sound perfectly. They've got fantastic tones on each of the instruments, yet they have not ignored modern technology, or you know what I mean, modern technology for the time. The
Yeah.
reverb, the delay, all enhances and adds to this psychedelic, spacey, modern feel for 1966, but still the raw energy of the power trio is there, and it keeps the initial idea and sound of the music at the root, just like the blues is at the
Yeah.
root, but takes in from different modern advancements and flourishes. It's just brilliant. My favourite part about the production is how, and this again comes down to it being a power trio, how loud or how prominent the rhythm section is.
Yeah.
There are songs where Clapton's, I think it's the first song, is it? Let me just double check. I think it's I Feel Free, where when it kicks in, you could argue the bass is louder than the
Oh yeah,
guitar.
the
Just in the
bass is in
first
your face for the
yeah,
whole album, more than the
exactly.
guitar for sure.
Yeah. But other than that, I think that's all I've got for my notes. Yeah, live and it's just brilliant. The highlighting of each instrument, the guitar, the bass, and the drums, the production done on them
Yeah.
for 1966 is amazing. Each instrument is so beautifully clear, and when you get those solo moments, the instruments just shine perfectly, don't they?
Yeah, they
Yeah.
do.
Excellent. All right. Well, let's wrap it up then. Let's talk about the legacy of the album. I mean, I think we've actually touched on all these points already in the episode,
Yeah.
but just to sort of recap them, you've got establishing the power trio, which is just, each member playing an equally important role. Because as we've said, in rock bands with a vocalist and two guitarists, drummer and bass player, you're going down the pecking order.
Yeah.
Shut up, play those root notes, play the beat, let everyone else shine. But in a power trio, it kind of excels more. And you've influenced Hendrix, Rush, The Police, Nirvana, countless power trios,
Yeah, having the bassist as the band leader as well is an interesting thing. So on
Yeah,
stage and on the record, I think Jack Bruce is the leader, is the main vocalist
yeah,
and the main songwriter. So it's an interesting thing to have the
it is, yeah.
bassist as the boss.
As we already said, bridging the gap between rock and blues, the Beatles and Stones really did their parts. The Stones were sort of far more bluesy than rocky, weren't they? Sort of 70, let's call them
Yeah.
80% blues, whereas the Beatles were the opposite. They were kind of 80% pop with a little bit of the blues influence coming in the early days. But Cream almost sit perfectly in the middle, don't they? It's like 50% blues, and then this song it'll be 50% psychedelic, or this song it'll be 50% hard rock, and they're just sort of, that's how they went on with it, really, I think. Pushing blues into a heavier, rockier, more experimental territory, which as a metal fan, for me, hugely important. We'll get to it when it comes up, but Sunshine of Your Love is arguably one of the first heavy metal riffs, if you like, because that obviously it's sticking to the blues pentatonic scale, but the tone of the guitar and the bass, that little the flat five note, the that really kind of sort of emphasizes the dissonance that heavy metal's known for. The psychedelic influence of merging blues with psychedelia featured later, and obviously went on to influence bands like Jefferson Airplane, The Doors, Pink Floyd. And then my final point for this is how much it did for rock. Because at this point, when you think of rock, you think in 1966, I suppose you are still thinking of Beatles, Kinks, Who, Rolling Stones.
Yeah.
None of those bands, I actually think all of those bands, apart from maybe the songwriting of the Beatles, I don't think any critical musician looked at those bands and thought, now that is art. Do you know what I mean? I look at Rubber Soul. I
In
look at
terms
the
of
album.
history, right?
Yeah.
If you compare music to every single art form.
Yeah,
And the
I
history of
look
art.
at Rubber Soul and I think that is a piece of art because they turned what was previously a bunch of singles into a cohesive album. But in terms of having virtuoso musicians in a band, and someone looking and saying, now this is a piece of art, because you have three virtuotistic musicians all coming together and putting what they're best at into songs.
Yeah.
I feel like this sounds like I'm saying Cream are better and more important than those other bands. But do you see what I'm saying?
But all those bands you've mentioned, they're not famous by people's ability to play the instrument. I'm not saying that
Exactly.
they couldn't play that well. The thing is, they were focused on delivering popular like singles and great albums. So it's like the focus is on the music,
Yeah.
on the songwriting, on
Yeah.
the deliver of that. with Cream, it's almost like the focus is on the musicians,
Yeah.
which is an important shift because it allowed rock music to become much more. So when you can do an album based on someone's ability to play the instrument, so why not? Why not
Yeah.
do that? It's not. It might not be your favorite kind of art, but when you have someone with that sort of ability, why should they just play the basics? Why should they do what everyone else was doing? So I think part of the legacy of this album is the freedom that rock musicians would have after this, thinking like, well, I can do all these fancy things on guitar, so why not use that in a song?
Yeah.
Not only on a live performance as well. That's the other thing. So they were bringing to studio elements that you would normally see in a music club in London. You would go out and go to a gig and see a band improvising, but then you buy a record. Is a 2.5 minute single, and it's like, so where is all that musical ability? Where is it? It used to belong to the music clubs, and then it became part of records since this album, I would say.
So with Cream, you're saying what you see is what you get.
Exactly.
What you see live is what you get on the album.
Again, on the album, which is really difficult to do, really.
That's a great point, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. All right, well, let's wrap up, man. Do you have anything else to say? Any other points you want to mention?
One last comment from me is like, Eric Clapton is one of my favorite songwriters, and I love his vocals. I had the chance to see him live in a private like charity gig, and it was one of the best experiences of my life. He still got it, like the vocals, the guitar is phenomenal. And with Cream, he wasn't there yet as a singer and as a songwriter. He was trying to find his voice, trying to find his place in music. He was just a guitar player, right? He was the god of guitar, but he was like basically there to play the guitar. And I think the time he had with them kind of expanded his music vocabulary to get away from traditional blues and being capable of doing everything he did for rock and pop music up to this day. So I think, so part of that album's legacy is Eric Clapton's solo career. I think the musician he became,
that's a great point,
after recording this album is what allowed him to do what he does up to this day.
You wonder how his career would have gone had he just stuck to the blues. And I know that, think about how many times
disappear
or just not become important enough because he only stuck to one style of music.
Yeah.
And I know we can say this with literally every other band, or what happened if Jimmy Page never hired John Paul Jones? What would happen if this? But I like it more here because Clapton was on a route, and I feel like Ginger Baker took him off that route, but stuck him on another route. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But yeah, anyway, cool. All right, well, let's wrap it up there. I've got my monologue for the album, so I will finish with that. But before we finish, we're going to do terms and conditions again, please, if you'd oblige us. If you're listening on Apple, Spotify, or Amazon, please do us a massive favour. Scroll down, rate the show 5 stars, write us a little review. It takes 20 seconds of your time, but means the world of us because we'll be seen by more people on the podcast apps. If you're watching on YouTube, please hit like and subscribe and share it with your friends who you think might enjoy it so that you can stay up to date with new content.
And if you're listening or watching this 300 years from now, you just like, share, or whatever you do with your social media or whatever form of internet you have.
Yeah, there'll be a chip in the brain by then.
Yeah.
So if you're listening to this 300, if you're listening to this 300 years from now, engage your mind chip and give us a review on all platforms. So thank you.
So our grandchildren can get some money out of this.
Yeah. Cool. Right. Amidst the flourishing British blues revival, 3 virtuoso musicians came together to form one of the world's first supergroups, Cream. Their debut album probably doesn't sit as highly amongst fans and critics the way that their following albums would, but it arguably played as big of a role in rock music evolution and progression. Fresh Cream wasn't just a collection of songs and singles, it was a cohesive album that blended traditional blues with rock, jazz and psychedelic music, all executed through the raw energy of a pioneering power trio. Musically, Fresh Cream bridged worlds. The album was deeply rooted in blues, with tracks like Spoonful and Rollin' and Tumblin' honouring their origins. But Cream amplified and electrified the genre, injecting it with aggression and experimentation. Songs like NSU and Sweet Wine laid the groundwork for hard rock, while I Feel Free and Sleepy Time Time explored the psychedelic sounds sweeping London. This blend of influences helped bring the blues to younger audiences while pioneering the power trio format, a lineup that inspired everyone from Hendrix to Rush to Nirvana. The production of Fresh Cream was equally innovative, striking a perfect balance between raw live energy and studio polish. The album captured the immediacy of their performances with minimal overdubs. The legacy of Fresh Cream is monumental if slightly understated. It established the power trio as a dominant rock format, elevated the role of virtuoso musicianship in popular music, and set the stage for both hard rock and psychedelia to thrive. Cream bridged the gap between the raw energy of blues and the expanding possibilities of rock, inspiring countless bands like Jefferson Airplane, The Doors, Led Zeppelin, and beyond. In doing so, Fresh Cream didn't just launch a band, it helped shape the future of rock.
Yeah, that's my only comment.
Yeah, hell yeah. Excellent. Right, well, let's call it a day there. Thank you very much, guys, for joining us for another episode of the Long Live Rock and Roll podcast. I've already given you the T's and C's twice, so just make sure you go and do that, and make sure you come back for the next episode next week.
Yeah, thanks for being with us one more time. Keep on rocking, everyone, and don't do anything else you can do.
And as usual, guys, take care and long live rock and roll.